welcome back. As you can see, the stage has been transformed. We're in comfy seats up at the front, and we've got about 25 minutes to have a bit of a Q&A. I'm going to ask another poll question in a minute. You can still ask questions at any point during the Q&A, so do use Slido. A few of you have come up to me in the break and said you're having trouble connecting to the Wi-Fi. So I'm also going to take questions from the floor by hands. I know there's at least 2 people who had questions that they haven't been able to submit on Slido, so I'm not going to make it stop you from asking questions. So we'll use the old-fashioned show of hands as well. Okay, well, let's kick off, though, with our second poll. So can we have it up on the screen? And again, you just need to use your mobile phones, and you can do this at home if you're watching at home. I saw someone watching at home with their dog earlier on, so I know we do have people watching at home. So our second poll question, that's the result of the first one. So did you understand what's meant by the term biopesticides? So most of you did, 85%, 20 of you responded, 85% of you did know what it meant before the presentation, and only 15% didn't. So that's good. We've got quite a knowledgeable audience tonight. Okay, our second poll question, can we have that up? Is it coming up? Anyway, it's on. It should. If you go to Slido, it'll be on the screen on Slido. The second poll question, I'll read it out, is: what is the single most important factor affecting your likelihood to use biological controls on your farm business? And so the 3 options are price, availability, or efficacy, i.e., the fact that how well it actually works. So if you can put your answers to that up, and we'll leave it up on the screen and come back to it in a moment. Okay. So we have got some questions in. I'm going to ask, this is actually one I noticed has come in from Charlie Wilson, who I know isn't in the room because she's watching at home with her dog. She was tweeting about it with a picture of her dog watching the screen. So I know that the live streaming is working. And her question is, precision agriculture is at the forefront of much farming conversation at the moment. How integrated is biocontrol with precision technology? So they're 2 distinct but very fast developing fields. Can they work together?
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, it's, I guess, a pipe dream, which is what I was sort of pointing out, but I don't see any reason why they shouldn't be fully integrated. I think they'll be very compatible once we, from our point of view, once we identify the volatiles that different pests and diseases give off, and then it's up to the engineers to get the drone technology or whatever they're going to use. I leave it up to them, whether they use drones or whether they adapt sort of tractors or harvesters that have a whole array of sensors and nozzles on the front. I mean, I think the world is their oyster once we identify the volatiles and people like Rob get the biopesticides working, then the engineers can implement it. So.
Well, I personally think it could make a huge contribution to the application of the macrobials, as I call them, the parasites and predators, because if we've got to treat an entire field just because we've got pests, a few hotspots of pests in there, but we don't know exactly where they are, it's going to be a hugely wasteful process. If we can send a robot in that goes up and down the field, picks up where the little hotspots of pests are, and there's a dollop of biocontrol material there, or a spot spray for that matter, depending on what sort of product we're using. That would make a huge difference to the success of these sort of techniques, or the cost-effective success of these sort of techniques, I would say.
Are we seeing any of that starting to happen already now in glass houses? Because I know there's quite a lot of technology already in glass houses.
I can't think of any examples in glass houses yet, but then remember we're working on a much more confined space, and I suppose it is more practical to actually walk that entire crop and do it manually. Now, I see the really big benefits of doing this on a crop, field scale.
A broad field, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, one of the questions from someone who couldn't submit it through Slido was from Peter Gadd. So I'm going to, here we go. To you, Peter. Excellent, well done. Did you speak into the black?
Bingo. Yes, both two sort of main points and then just a final supplementary. It seems to me that the big problem from a lot of farmers' perspective is that it's the environment that we have to control in order to get the best use out of many of these opportunities going forward. So, glasshouse environment, I'm just wondering whether, Rob, I think you touched on it briefly, but looking at lighting, and you talked about growing crops 24/7, 100% output. I just wonder whether UV lighting or other forms of lighting could be used to enhance the biopesticide effect and reduce the effect of the pests that we're trying to knock out. From the point of view of broadacre cropping, I just wonder whether a combination of biopesticides in conjunction with more sort of gene sequencing of the crop's DNA, such that we could enhance, again, the biopesticides that we're using and inhibit the actual pests. And I'd use cabbage stem flea beetle in oilseed rape as an example of where some varieties of oilseed rape will inhibit cabbage stem flea beetle feeding. And the supplementary was, who do you think should be funding some of this, or even all of it? Do you think it should be blue sky, BBSRC type work and government involvement, or do you think it should be nearer market, AHDB led, and maybe leveraged funding?
I think we've got three questions there. I think the first one was about manipulating lighting, which is probably the one I can answer, and then I'll hand over to Simon.
Thanks.
We already have examples of using plastics which can modify the spectrum of light which reach the plants in polythene tunnels and that sort of thing. And they can have an impact. Of course, we've got to be very careful what we do, because as I tried to explain in one of my slides, every change we make is likely to impact on some other part of the IPM program. So for instance, if we do take, I think you mentioned UV light, if we take the UV light out, then suddenly we have a problem with bumblebees finding the flowers to pollinate them. So there's, it's never quite as simple as we think, and I think this is something that often catches students out, because they're usually looking at one particular control measure in isolation and get all excited when it works, and it's not until they come to talk to us at the Tomato Growers Association and tell us what a wonderful idea that they've got, that we point out that, well, yes, unfortunately, but then our bees won't work. So, but certainly manipulating the light spectrum has huge potential benefits under polythene tunnels. I'm not quite sure how you go about that in an open field situation.
Okay, so Rob's left me two questions. The first one about using gene manipulation in conjunction with biopesticides. Yeah, I think if you can make, say, the oilseed more resistant, then that slows the pest down, and the biopesticide will then have the chance to work more effectively and sort of not more quickly in actual time, but more quickly in terms of the development of the insects. So yeah, I think those would be very compatible and a good approach, that use the partial plant resistance to make them more susceptible to a biopesticide. That should work pretty well. The funding issue, as somebody who initially used to get funding from the Agriculture and Food Research Council, which some of you may be old enough to remember, in those days we used to have a lot of agricultural funding. When the BBSRC was invented, it was very noticeable that funding towards agriculture did sort of really almost disappear. In my opinion, the BBSRC has basically been hijacked by a lot of people doing biomedical research, dressing it up as other research. And because you look at some of the things and you think, why isn't the MRC funding that? So I think really we should get a lot more blue sky funding from the BBSRC. They should actually readdress their priorities and actually look at funding agricultural research very much more seriously than they do at the moment. That said, I think the levy boards should also play their part And I guess we should also think the agrochemical industry should sort of get in there too. But I do think we do need more blue sky from BBSRC.
Peter, hold that for a moment, because I want to bring in the next question, which I think in some ways is sort of the $64,000 question, and it's from Jack Richardson. I'm not sure if you're in the room. Jack, he is, and he's very close to you, Peter, which is good news. So a short hop. Could you speak into the black dot? That's it.
Yeah. So my question, as everyone can see, is how far away are we from widespread biocontrols for the use in large-scale commercial cereal crops? And I'd like to add, my biggest problem at home is slugs. So if anyone could solve them, that'd be fantastic.
It's interesting you should say that, because I think we're probably closer to controlling slugs than most of the other pests with nematodes, for instance. You know, we do have a biocontrol agent that is perhaps, it could possibly be used on a large scale. I think the challenges for many of the other pests are much greater, in fact, at the moment. Yeah, because we haven't necessarily got the tools in place. That doesn't mean that we can't get there in the near future.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as Rob says, I think slugs are probably the most amenable. I mean, at Harper, for example, we're looking at better ways of tracking the slugs. So Tom Pope and Keith Walters are both sort of looking at radio tracking, finding out where slugs actually hide, so that you can put the biocontrol options in the neighbourhood of the slugs. So making it more efficient. And I think, for large-scale commercial cereal crops, for things like the aphids and stuff like that, it would be nice to think that it might happen in my lifetime, but I'm not sure that it will. It depends on how the perhaps sort of fungal control using myco pesticide-based things against cereal aphids or the midges goes. But, I'm hopeful, but it's certainly not going to happen tomorrow.
I think some of the biocontrols, some of the biopesticides are there. It's just we don't know how to use them to best effect. And leaving aside some of the plant volatiles, which I think probably have a different mode of action, most of the biopesticides that we have available to us now depend very much on contact action. So first and foremost, we've got to get those biopesticides, those products, into contact with the target organism. And that is probably the first, the first problem. How do you get a target organism onto the underside of leaves? We've probably got to rethink spray technology. You can get away with an awful lot of spray inefficiencies with chemical pesticides that that have some sort of vapor action once they land on the leaf or penetrate the leaf, have some form of translaminar or limited systemic action. You don't necessarily have to get entire crop coverage, but with most of the biopesticides you do. You have to hit the target organism. And that is probably one of the biggest problems to overcome. There is an AHDB horticulture project running at the moment. It's called AMBER, which is looking at trying to improve biopesticide use in protected edible and ornamental crops. And I think I'm have a minor role in that as a consultant to it. I think the experimenters are making some really good progress already in understanding where those biopesticides have to go and the best way to get them there. And I think there'll be a knock-on benefit there to all of the crops. So I think we're making progress. But that's really, I think in the first place, that's the way we've got to go.
Getting the biocontrol in contact with the target, maybe that is an area where a combination of the biocontrol and precision technology might be able to help us.
Absolutely, but even if you know which part of the field you've got a hotspot of pest disease, you've still got to get that biopesticide into contact with the target organism, and if it's on the underside of a leaf in a dense canopy, that's a real challenge.
Maybe that's I know that at Harper Adams, as well as the lovely entomology department, you've got a fantastic ag engineering department, and they're working on some fantastic techniques to put stuff with pinpoint accuracy on plants.
Yeah, I mean that's the whole, I guess, ambition is that we are able to combine the detection and the application into one super cool machine.
Can we get the results of that second poll up again? Which was about what factors might hold back, assuming it was available, what would hold back. So it seems pretty clear it's efficacy. So if it works,
pay for it.
It works well, that would overcome what people are saying would be the single most important factor affecting their likelihood to adopt biocontrols.
I think the result on price might be a little misleading, because I suspect most people don't yet appreciate how much some of these non-chemical programs might actually cost their business.
But I guess if you're one of the things about price is if you're comparing with today's prices, that's maybe not a fair comparison, because I guess in the sort of medium to long term, we're probably not going to be able to continue to farm in exactly the same way as we farm now. So costs are probably going to go up anyway.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, we have access to a screen down here, so I keep pointing down there. I can't see this one, but I can see a screen down in front of us. And it was interesting that the availability just popped up to 12%, because I'm surprised availability isn't higher, actually, because I would have thought availability of useful products, if we're looking at an entire program, then I think availability is a serious issue.
Maybe that just shows the supreme confidence of the audience in your ability to sort these problems out.
Did it go up again then?
They are every time someone else votes, the numbers change. I know. There's a question which is submitted anonymously, so I'm going to read it out. But I think again it's an area that I gather is quite an important area. This is about the regulatory regime. Does regulatory legislation need to change to make it easier and less expensive for manufacturers to bring biopesticides to market? Now, I have heard it argued that the current regime is making it particularly hard and maybe is unfair against biocontrols. Is that true?
Could I actually link that to the next question as well?
Yeah,
because
please.
I keep looking at that, and you've jumped ahead of it, and it's been irritating me ever since I saw it. It says, why are the US so far ahead of us in the area of biocontrol? And in many aspects, they're not, and I would definitely say they're not. But in terms of availability of biopesticides, they certainly are, and that, I believe, and I'm certainly no expert in regulatory legislation, but they certainly seem to have a lot more biopesticides registered in North America than we have in the UK, and I think that does come down to the complexity of our system, and there really doesn't seem to be a way at the moment of simplifying that, or you seem to have to just put the product in and wait for it to churn through the system. So,
on top of that, who does the regulation? Is that through CRD or an equivalent body?
it is part of CRD, yes. And many of the same, I think they do have a different process within CRD, but it's based, I believe it's fundamentally based on the same principles. And of course, I'm really rapidly getting out of my depth here because I'm not a specialist in regulation, but yes, it does seem that our system is overly complicated, and I would like to see it simplified, certainly.
I mean, I sort of go along with that. I've certainly heard numerous colleagues who are sort of involved in the development of biopesticides who do complain bitterly about the legislative aspects. The other bit about why are the US so far ahead of us in the area of biocontrol, if they are, and again, Rob and I think perhaps they aren't that far ahead, but one of the reasons is that in the United States, the university system is much more geared towards training crop protection specialists. So they even have departments of entomology. We haven't had a department of entomology in a UK university since 1980s, I think. And when I was an undergraduate, there were seven, which is a lot compared with what we have now, but with the States, it's not very many. There were 7 specialist degrees that trained crop protection specialists and at undergraduate level, and there aren't any of those really left anymore. There's no entomology degrees, though we are starting one next academic year. So basically, entomology training is postgraduate, and crop protection training tends to be very much postgraduate in the UK. So there aren't as many of us, which puts you at a disadvantage straight away.
I should stress, if you do get the chance to look around the department there, it is absolutely very impressive. When I was there was a chap who had the most steady hands I've ever seen, gluing a wire to an aphid, to the back of an aphid, and I don't know how he managed to do that. Very impressive. I was going to come on to another anonymous question, but I did promise I'd open it up to people from the floor who were struggling to ask their questions via Slido. So, show of hands, are there any, before I come to the next anonymous question, are there any? There's one down, it's Andrew Ward down the front here, so that's a bit of a further throw. Andrew, you can make yourself ready to receive. Excellent, 100% success so far.
Yeah, just a very fascinating and interesting evening we've had. But what we've just seen, will this satisfy our good old friends, all the environmentalists who are against everything we try and do in crop production?
So are the environmentalists very positive about biocontrols, or do they have another set of problems?
I mean, I'd say they would very much welcome anything that would increase sort of conservation biocontrol. So I think they would be very much on the side of biopesticides. What do you think, Rob?
Have you been in touch with any of them?
Or
they've been in touch with you?
I may, of course, perhaps the only ones who contact me are the people who are interested in it. But I've been doing quite a lot of stuff on conservation biocontrol for 10 or 15 years now, and the farmers that we use are always very interested in how they can make their sort of headlands more compatible with natural enemy production. And my contacts on interactions I have on Twitter, I guess the sort of greener side of people seem to be on side with that approach. That I think they certainly regard a biopesticide approach better than much better than a chemical approach. Whether they would be as keen on the future where you still keep the large-scale farming and use biopesticides, or whether they'd probably be more towards the side of the small, more diverse cropping and smaller fields. So.
You're obviously better at putting your side of the story across to your counterparts on Twitter than I am with glyphosate.
There was an excellent speaker at the Oxford Farming Conference, I think it was 2 years ago, who was talking about using biocontrols on a farm in Kenya. And she argued very eloquently that the regulatory regime should be relaxed in Europe to make it easier to get you through. And I thought her argument was one which would go down well with those with strong environmental concerns, which is that in most cases these controls are things that are already in the environment, so you're not introducing something totally new to the environment. So some of those concerns about, you just don't know what it's going to do because there's no experience of having it in the environment, that often aren't, that you just don't have those concerns with biocontrols. So you would hope they would be a bit more.
I would say, really, and there are lots of different agendas, that's the trouble, aren't there? But in general terms, I would say they should be really pleased that this is, and see this as a positive way forward. They may not agree with every aspect of what we're doing, but as a general way forward, it's surely got to be positive. But I'm intrigued by your question in a different way, because something's made you ask it, and I would like to turn it round, and perhaps you could tell us what you've got in mind specifically. You mentioned glyphosate, is that?
Well, yeah, I'm active on Twitter on helping to try and save glyphosate and putting the good points across about why we have to use it and sort of how it's environmentally friendly and all the usual things. But they're never backwards in coming forward and saying I'm talking rubbish and that all our arguments are one-sided and they're absolute rubbish. And I just wondered from that point of view, you know, whether they're on your side.
Well, that doesn't really sound very constructive, does it?
Exactly. No, it doesn't.
So, I mean, you know, I say in general terms, people should see it as a positive way forward. There may well be some good arguments about in some specific areas, but they've got to be presented as good arguments, and they can't just be you can't just be sort of shouted down and told that everything you say is rubbish. You know, we're trying our best, for goodness sake, to feed the world in a way that has minimal effect on the environment, and somehow we've got to feed this population that's growing. I'm sure somebody's got in the room has got the figures, but you know, and the population is growing enormously. We're chopping down rainforests for extra agricultural land, yet we're still, as I understand it, losing 20% of food that's produced either in the field or in store. And before we chop down any more rainforests and create any more agricultural land, surely it's better to find ways of reducing that 20% loss. And you know, I would have thought that what we're suggesting is, you know, is all moving in that direction.
I know we're tight on time. I've got another question at the back, so I'm definitely going to take that. If you can throw that.
Come on, James.
And James, we've got one more poll. No more polls, right? So I think we're going to have to make this the last question, I'm afraid.
Right, yeah. Thank you. Can I just ask the Professor, how far are you away from not commercial trials on biopesticides, but really being able to bring it out from being nearly like a lab situation into something that maybe you might be thinking about small-scale trial and looking at comparators and things like that? How is it looking for you?
I mean, given the funding, I mean, I think we could do a trial, you know, almost immediately, if somebody would actually put forward the funding for us to get out there and put something out in the field. You know, we've got the facilities at Harper. We could do a small scale, you know. So, like a hands-free
as farmers, can we then help through the government process to try and get some money from what I call primary look-see? In other words, not taking it to near market and nonsense like that.
Yeah, I don't see why not.
If we got a group together and said, look, this is important to take it forward.
Yeah, I mean, that would be very welcome.
I think there's a lot of.
I think that's where Farmers Weekly
that would.
Carl, I think Farmers Weekly
that.
want to disseminate it well, and ask people to come in on like you did on glyphosate and things and hedge cutting. Get people to sort of say, let's take this forward as part of our future.
Yeah. Sounds like a challenge. Sounds like a good challenge. Yeah.
Who else wants the ball?
If you hold on to the ball, because I think we're going to have, unfortunately, we have to end the Q&A bit now. But actually, one of the questions asked earlier may be able to be picked up by our final speaker, because I know there's probably not many companies that have as much experience as Syngenta at sort of taking products through the very, very complex regulatory process. So I don't know if he's going to touch on how that applies to biocontrols. But first, can I just give big thanks again to our two speakers from the first part of the session, to Professor Simon Leather and Dr. Rob. Your name's gone completely from my mind, Rob. I'm getting so old now. And Dr. Rob.
Try harder.
Jacobson, Dr. Rob Jacobson. Please give a big round of applause to us.